Welcome to the Equipping Leaders Podcast, Leader Study Series. I'm Natasha, a leader development professional and overall leadership enthusiast.
And I'm Corey, a program manager and an emerging people leader, thus a leadership enthusiast.
We are doing a leader study of the TV show Z Nation, deconstructing the leaders, decisions, and team dynamics of the characters on the show, to look at how leadership is all around us. And even if we're not in a position of leadership, we can still demonstrate it in our actions, responses, and opportunities.
Z Nation aired from 2014 to 2018, but if you haven't seen it yet, there will be spoilers in these episodes. Today, we're talking about Season 4, specifically moving from leader to follower, evolving team dynamics, adapting, and leading in ambiguity. Let's jump in.
So in Season 4, the team has essentially kind of come back together. Warren is leading them. She doesn't know where or why or how or anything like that. But we're now in Season 4, Episode 4. So I'll turn it over to you. What were some of your takeaways?
I think the team is sort of storming in this episode. And what I think is interesting is they're in this like vehicle wasteland, right? It's like I think the sergeant says like they had intel or something from the military. It was like 200 square miles of just, it essentially looks like a junkyard, but I guess there's a giant traffic jam from the zombies. And I think it's interesting from a storming perspective because the backdrop it's like this endless just challenge. It seems like, you know what I mean? You can't find the end of it. You're in it. There's left, right, center. It all looks the same. And Murphy has to become a good follower again. And I don't think he ever was the best, but I think there might be a different appreciation that he has for it now, having had been a leader. And I kind of noticed he's a bit, I'll say like protective almost of Warren. He's trying to now, instead of being another leader, he's trying to be an advisor. And I think that that's really interesting of an approach. And Warren is so absorbed right now in kind of the visions that she's having right now, and she's not really discussing that too much. But so I don't know if now he's taking license because she's not saying shut up, so to speak. That's what he needs to be. So now he's starting to, you see it throughout the episode, but he starts to lean into that advisory role a little bit more with everyone, and just the good idea fairy / everybody's a critic, which is I thought that was kind of interesting. So that was my first kind of observation.
Yes, in this episode in general, Murphy does several things he would never have done as a follower in the past. So I really like that you identified him more as an advisor. I hadn't thought about it like that, but yeah, I mean, that is definitely the role he stepped into. And also that kind of like learning to be a follower in this new place, also having this historic knowledge of the team. I think this is the first episode where they didn't have to beg Murphy to mercy a zombie. He did it, as part of, just being in the group. It was a threat to the group, and then he mercied it. So it's just interesting to see Murphy figuring out what his role on the team looks like now. Now he's just a regular team member. He's not the mission. So what does that mean, and what does that look like? So I like the call out though to the role him taking of potential advisor.
Yes, that was my first kind of big takeaway. What about for you? I mentioned like mercying the zombie thing, and I think that's interesting.
Yes, well, I think that, so the other piece here too is like Lucy's role kind of in all of this. And especially with Warren still having these visions, but Lucy's big thing in the past was her connection to Murphy, obviously parent-child, that type of thing. But what I thought was so interesting here was that it's like she no longer feels connected to Murphy, but she feels very connected to Warren for whatever reason, right? That's not really explained. It's just something that she expresses that she feels. And I think that's interesting because Murphy is doing these things to also try to appeal to other team members, right? He mercies the zombie to kind of help out Lucy. But at the same time, she's having none of that. But again, even though the team members may not like each other, in this case, there's that just stress between Murphy and Lucy, they still believe in that leader. So, like you said, Murphy's protective of Warren, and Lucy just believes her. She's not sure why. It's just a feeling she has. So I think that that's really interesting, especially when, as a leader, Warren is unsure of what these visions mean, of what that actually is. And it also reminds me of sometimes people, especially people who've been in leadership roles in the past, they know to move forward, but sometimes they get caught in being busy, and it's just about being busy and it's not about being productive. And it almost feels like a little bit like that, where it's like it's undefined, and it's like we know we're moving towards something. We don't know what that thing is. And it's like, is this just busy work that you're giving us to keep us together? But then there are these like just little connections within the team. And then again, with Warren being like the main hub of the connection.
Yeah, the other thing too is Lucy is kind of taking I didn't think about it, but like Lucy's sort of taking the Murphy role, because used to be Murphy very heavily sympathized with the zombies, and bordering to the point where he would place the safety of the zombies above the safety of the team. I'm not saying he necessarily ever did that, but that he was on that precipice of doing that, right? And I think that now Murphy understands the importance and the strength of the team, because he's matured a little bit in understanding the goals. But now you have Lucy, who's not as mature, both with the team as well as just as like who she is as a person, and she does have this like heavy like sympathizing with the zombies themselves. So I think I didn't even think about that. And I think Murphy has a lot of, he's walked in those shoes before, and I think he could really help mentor and guide her, and like be more understanding and passionate. And he's kind of not, like you said, he's immersed in that zombie to try to build that strength back up in the team. So it's an interesting, I don't know if I would do differently as Murphy, but that's an interesting, yeah, it's true. That's interesting.
And just like you said, we're back in storming. What does that mean? And what does that look like? And who are we trying to appeal to, and why? And in this, it's unique. Lucy's obviously Murphy's kid, and she has some feelings about whether or not he was around and all of that. So obviously different than in the workplace. But again, people can have feelings about different folks on the team that are unexplainable and maybe seem unreasonable, but it doesn't mean that they're not there, and that it's not something that is a hindrance to the team. And so that's why I think that with that, it's so interesting too, where sometimes someone will do something to try to appeal to one person. And it's like, yeah, but like to what end?
Yeah. So
I'm
I think
not mature enough. Sorry.
Oh no, you're good. Yeah. Again, we're talking about, they're storming, they're in this weird place. I always think it's interesting too, because one of the trials that they run into are like these new types of zombies, and now there's this sort of unseen sort of seen like zombie rats, it seems like, you know what I mean? And that's a new challenge because they move very quickly. A lot of the tools, tasks, and processes that they had as an old team aren't working well, and they didn't work with those unmerciable zombies that they ran into kind of last episodes. Now these zombie rats, they're really struggling. Their sort of tactics are needed to change, and I think it's interesting too, because we've talked about this previously. The environment has changed, so you have to change, right? Your processes have to change, and you can fall into that trap of this worked before, it'll work again, and you will keep trying to make something work again, even though the situation has changed, because it seems like the easier way. And so I think there's a lot of really interesting. I'm saying interesting a lot, but that's, we'll pick a different word. What's another word for interesting?
That's really something, isn't it?
Well, let me tell you. I reckon. Going southern now. I don't know what's happening. The but there's all these new issues while they're still storming, and storming is hard enough, right? Trying to get together, try to get over that hump into the forming stage is difficult on its own. And when you're throwing these additional challenges in there, it's crazy because Warren, who normally is really good about um, um, herding the flock, you know what I mean? Getting everybody rowing in the same direction. She is so now caught up in these visions, and she hasn't shared those visions with the team yet. So one of the other key tenets, what makes Warren a great leader, which that makes her effective with the group, and that ultimately makes the group so effective, is her clear cut verbalization, expression, and explanation of the goals. And she has not done that yet. And what I think is really interesting is the team themselves starts to acknowledge and understand that that's missing, and they essentially have an intervention with her to say, you need to tell us what's going on. So and I think that shows like the power that the team can have themselves, right? Because everyone on the team is a leader, but then I think the team itself can be this aliens no can be its own. The team as a group can be an individual entity of a leader. So you have like this team leader council thing that's coming in and saying, we've all discussed, we're talking with one voice. You've not explained the goals. You need to explain the goals to us. And I thought that was so like super cool. Like that's super cool.
Well, and I think what was so valuable about that moment too was they weren't asking her to do something she had never done before. And I think sometimes people, they're like, oh, I'm going to guide this person, or I'm going to give them this feedback or this advice. And they ask someone to do a behavior that they have never seen that person do before. And they don't realize how big of a change that is for someone. It seems like a simple ask, but it's not. It's really not. It's hard to change behavior. And so what I do appreciate about this too is it was about what you're saying about that intervention that they had was they were asking for something that she had given them before. And because of that, she was able to respond, right? She wasn't able to give them what they needed, but there was also more clarity around just how unclear it was, right? And so it's she still doesn't tell them everything that she has yet, but I think that's also really interesting because it's like how transparent can you be? As transparent as possible is, of course, the right answer. But if you truly don't know and you're trying to make sense of something, is giving people a bunch of disparate thoughts about a black rainbow and people catching on fire, that feels aggressive, and it sounds way scarier than maybe potentially whatever it actually is. So I can understand to that aspect of I'm going to be as transparent as possible. Maybe I don't know. When I do, you'll be the first to know. But again, in that they weren't asking her for something she'd never done before. And I think that's why she received it so well.
Yeah. And I think it was cool because, like you said, she's saying something crazy, or what would appear to be crazy, like black rainbow and all this other stuff, and raining fire, and it's scary too. But you know, I think she failed to acknowledge how understanding the team could be, and because they'd been through so much, and given the situation, none of that sounds crazy. You know what I mean? And I think also in the real world, right, not the zombie apocalypse, I think there's been times in the past where I've been a little like hesitant. Like I'd go to a meeting, right, with stakeholders or like the senior leadership to do the report, the health of we call them weekly activity reports or wars, right? What's going on, what's happening, what's the customer saying. And it comes back that, maybe we're very close, 70-80% of the way done with something, and the customer wants to get rid of all that, not important anymore, completely shift. And that's the nature of the beast. But it's like one of those, you get these butterflies in your stomach to go tell everyone, like, you can stop working on that, because you're like, it makes me look bad, or like, I don't know what's going on, and they're going to think it's a waste of their time. But that happens so frequently that it's not a surprise. And it still get butterflies every time, because I think the work that everyone's doing is good and valuable. but I also like, they're gonna be mad at me, but yeah, you know what I mean? Like, they're gonna be mad at me. I'm gonna seem like the bad guy, and they understand. So, you don't always give people the credit that they deserve. You know what I mean? You sort of start to put your own reactions into how you think they're gonna react. So
Exactly. And I see that, yeah, so often, like people can handle things. I get to work with people who sometimes I see them not giving the credit due to people about what they can handle. They act like whatever they say, it's like the linchpin for how someone's entire day and life is going to go. It's not. Like you said, people understand. And if people really are not professionally mature enough to understand it, that's twofold, right? So that's something that they need to work on themselves, right? Through different experiences and all that sort of stuff. But it's also on you as a leader for not developing them in all the ways that you could. I'm not saying that every person who doesn't have professional maturity, that's the leader's fault. But I am saying that when we're transparent as leaders, when we are consistent as leaders, we're showing people, we're explaining how things work and how systems work. And if we're not doing that, if we're forwarding information or we're worried that they can't handle it, we're creating people who can't handle it because we're not sharing anything with them. But the more we share, the more they actually start to see how this thing works, how this organization works. And even if there are some things that aren't great, well, now you potentially have more people who can solve that problem instead of just being like, oh, well, I'll just tell you what you need to know when you need to know it. Unless it's actually going to hurt them or hurt the company, just tell people.
yeah, it's funny too. You talk about like the experience. Again, something else I forget because I'm always like, well, I don't care or I won't be mad because I've dealt with this 1,000 times before. Most of the people that I've been on my team also been in the same industry, been doing the same work for roughly the same amount of time as me. So if I've dealt with it 1,000 times, even if they've been at it a few years less than me, probably means they've at least dealt with it 800 times. You know what I mean? Or 500 times. So it's not a surprise either. So I think that's the other piece that's interesting. Got to keep in mind if it's not your first time seeing it, probably not everyone else's first time seeing it either.
Right. Absolutely.
But those are the big ones. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And then I was gonna say, and then from here we move into the next episode where we're still in this place of ambiguous guidance from Warren, but she is trying to be more communicative, which is, I say it so slowly like that because I've definitely been in those situations where they're like, this end result is this thing. We don't know how we're going to get there. Get everybody ready. And you're like, okay, how and for what exactly? Don't know. So let me share what I do know. So yeah, it's interesting. And here we also see how Lucy is communicating with zombies in ways that are really helpful for the group because they're in this bunker and there's all sorts of just different ways of communicating. So what I thought was interesting about this was, like you said previously, Lucy had kind of taken on a little bit of this Murphy role, just this kind of like as a team member, just not as mature as the others, also due to probably her age, not trying to be ageist. But with this, she also is seeing this value she brings to the team, which I think is really cool. And I think it's also really interesting they don't really address this on the show, but just that like from that perspective, potentially of Murphy to be like, oh yeah, that was a strength that I had at one point too. And to see it in someone else. I just feel like, when I saw that part, I was like, it just reminded me of like mentorship and sponsorship, all these different ways that we try to help others. And you see the strength that you had in someone else. And it's like, oh yeah, how do I cultivate that more?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the other thing that's interesting too with Lucy is within the premise of this show, she is a nondescript age, but we will call it an older teenager, right? 18, 19, she could even be in her 20s. She is how she looks, how she appears, how she carries herself. She has only been alive for like 3 human years. So I think it's also there's that like she hasn't amassed a lot of observations or experiences, even though you would assume she's gotten decades or a couple decades worth or rounding out that number. And I think that's interesting too, because I'm not devaluing her input, her thoughts, her feelings, her emotions, or what she's observed so far, because she also is the only person in the group who has existed in their totality of their life cycle within the set world of zombies existing. So she's not trying to get back to anything before. She doesn't know what before that looked like. And I think that's kind of interesting with when we get new folks in on the team. And you talked about this, it might have been a couple episodes ago, I don't remember, but like the idea or concept of like we want to look back and get back to where we were before, even though things are changing in front of us. Like you'll get these new team members, they don't know anything about that before time, like when it seemed like everything was going really great. So for them, this is their baseline, and they either want to sustain that or make that better or whatever. And I think that's what's really interesting with Lucy is she's a new team member in the perspective of, for them, their sort of blue sky thinking goal is that we live in a zombie-free world. She doesn't know what that looks like and isn't asking for that. She's fine with zombies. There's no issues with that's just part of life. So I think that's like a really interesting sort of situation.
That is, and I really like the example too you gave of some people when they join a team, like this is what they know. And so with people trying to change it, they're like, change it to what? Like, what could be better than the team right now?
Yeah.
But then also kind of emphasizing that when you have someone new, kind of like Liz Wiseman talks about these rookie smarts, which is like this new perspective of this is the world right now. That is what Lucy's bringing to us. This is not a problem because this is just how the world is. Why are you fighting against something that is a reality? And so, yeah, I think on teams, when people join or whatever, it's important to like, what is the makeup of this now? What is the reality right now? And how do we move forward with all of this instead of trying to find a past state that probably wouldn't work for us anymore anyway, given the new people, given new projects and missions and stuff like that.
So yeah, that was that was something that I thought was really interesting. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting within this episode is sort of the like communication, you know what I mean? Of they're getting back into it, they're getting back into their groove, and they're using those strengths, that knowledge to sort of talk through some of the issues that they're running into. And I again, it's just that fallback of good communication skills as a leader, as a follower, and how that can really make up for a lot of like missing pieces. Do you know what I mean? There can be a lot of things that you don't know, a lot of skills that maybe you don't have, but if you have those strong communication skills and are being like an effective listener and sharing that, gosh, there's so many places that you can not be 100% at, but you never know it because you're communicating so well.
It's easier to have faith in someone or in a project when you know as much as you can. If you know A and C, it's easier to take that leap of faith on the team and not know what B is and still continue to move forward. But you're right, it's that like the way they're coming back together and communicating and sharing that that's what creates that strong foundation, because no foundation is perfect. But how do we, bring it back together again? We keep saying it, it's that communication.
Yeah, so that was the big thing to me, I think, for this one.
And then, so as we move forward, it's just interesting over the next couple episodes. And it's really how the team members, we're still following Warren's vision, but how the team members then start to interact with each other in unexpected ways. Lucy with Murphy, and then also kind of team tensions that do start to rise up, and then decisions that people are making. So I know for me, one of the things as we move into the next episode is that we're starting to get more information about Warren and what it is that's going on with her. Nothing concrete and nothing helpful, but definitely more information. And so what I think is so interesting about that is, again, that's that ambiguity of life and of leadership and all of that. But so now she kind of like, she knows combinations to things. She doesn't know why she knows that. She knows just these different pieces. But also as the group is seeing that, they're seeing that it's like, oh, this is something. It's almost like that little thing where it's like, I can't explain that, but I can't dismiss it either. And I think that there are sometimes things like that in projects or on teams that you just have to acknowledge.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And like there's, like you said, there's a trust that has to be developed for that to work, and for that to be okay. And a lot of times in my environment as well, people don't necessarily know all the pieces, and that's by design, right? From a proprietary nature, and that's something that everyone accepts, and it is so. But it does. People will sometimes take advantage of a lack of knowledge, right? They'll hoard it, as like to lord it over people, and what stinks about that is that creates a lot of distrust, and it's hard to um we've talked about losing trust and gaining trust back, as an individual, but it's more about a precedent of a baseline is set, right? Where people who know things, and some people know things, some people don't know things. Best not to say what I know, because they're probably never going to tell me what they know, or they're not going to work with that effectively. But like this baseline, right, where it's like everybody's sort of quiet and caged off about that sort of thing, and doesn't want me to succeed because then they won't succeed first. And I'm talking around an issue, so it's kind of not worth even bringing up. I apologize for it, but
I was gonna say, it just sounds like where you work is incredibly toxic. I'm sorry. It sounds
it's not.
wild.
It's not. It's a great place, employer listening. I'm very happy to be there. No, I'm kidding. And it's funny. It's not even people I work with. It's not my team. It's not my company. It's just within the organization or within the environment where we work, you run into those people. So there's this, instead of there being, you trust everyone off the bat, there's a, you distrust everyone off the bat. So it's like you have to be very pessimistic versus optimistic when you're interacting with people outside of your team, So it's kind of a weird shift. But again, we communicate pretty well and effectively on our team, so we don't have to worry about that as much. And something else I thought was really interesting here was when you talked about the team interacting in different ways, like Lucy with Murphy. I think one of the other things was you run into these different, they're running into like these more complex issues now, right? So like and morally complex issues of like they run into somebody who's both a zombie as well as somebody who can talk, right? Some weird hybrid science project gone wrong. And I think that starts introducing these different things, because from a mission perspective, everyone was pretty aligned on mission goals and like what needed to happen operationally. And now what you're running into is people can be effective on a team working and have slightly different moral compasses, but now you're starting to bring in this layer of morality onto this whole thing. And I think that's really interesting too, because it's a new level of complexity that they've never run into before.
I agree. And over this time, we also see as Lucy and Murphy Lucy was rejecting Murphy, again, a family type dynamic that just wasn't working. But then when something happens to Murphy, Lucy is right there. And Lucy sacrifices herself essentially to save him, to make sure that he can continue to move forward. And what I thought was so interesting about that interaction too was sometimes we have those new people on a team, or people who are like new professionals, right, or whatever. And there's things that they just can't seem to get along with certain people. It's a professional maturity thing. And then all of a sudden they make this big comeback that saves something on the team. And so that's why I always think, now if someone is toxic or abusive, they don't belong on the team. That's obviously not the right environment for them. You got to let them go. But other times it's like if something just is like clunky and not working, you never know when somebody will be able to have the opportunity to step into a strength or step into something that is like they know how to own that thing regardless of experience and regardless of that professional maturity, and really take it across the finish line where it needs to be. So that's what I thought was so interesting as I was watching that dynamic there. Like, again, I know it's familial and all of that, but I've just definitely seen people where you're like, okay, this person, they're fine, but I wouldn't be like high performer. And then all of a sudden a scenario or a situation comes up and they meet that moment so perfectly that you're like, oh, this is why they're part of the team. This is what we need to continue to cultivate. And that other stuff we'll work on it. Right. But that's what I kind of liked about that interaction was it was like, oh yeah, she stepped up, even though she had issues with Murphy, even though all these other things, another drive within her was like, this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's so true. Like, especially like you said, like people being able to step into strengths, it is key. Because sometimes too with team members, you might know like the whole plan and the bigger picture, but maybe you don't always know somebody's skills, and their skills just might be for that next step that we aren't at yet, but they got there just a little bit too early, So, and I always try to be cognizant of that. It happens a lot in my industry, and I think that's a double-edged. It's two levels of stress there, right? There's your stress with the person because maybe it seems like they're not doing as much as you are, like they're not pulling their weight, or like you said, they're not there, but that person's also feeling that, right? Like they didn't take the job because they wanted to do nothing, they wanted to contribute their skills, and if they don't have the avenue to do that, I think there's also that fear of, well, it looks like I'm doing nothing, or they're paying me to do nothing, so like I need to find something to do, and then you might end up making mistakes because you're really forcing your going way outside of what you were hired to do, what your comfort zone was, because you really want to show that you can contribute to work with the team, and then you mess something up, and the team has to fix it, so they like you less, so you try harder to do something else to make a bigger mistake, and it's
Yeah.
got to be careful with that. Not that I've ever done that.
That does not sound like a story from experience.
No, nope.
And also at this point, like Warren, again, we're still following this vision. And she also gets to a point as a leader where she's like, of course, thank you for following me. Right. Yes. I don't know where this is going, and I feel like it's becoming too detrimental to the team. We're starting to lose people over something that I am unclear about. So I can't tell you what that mission is. So she makes a decision essentially to give people the choice. So you can still follow me, not going to stop you from doing that. Doesn't even try to sway people one way or the other, but also suggests that they go to Numerica, because that is what many of the team members want. That was originally when they all kind of started to get back together. That's where they were traveling, and then she took them east. And so I think that that can be really challenging too, because as a leader, you want to lead, right? That's what you want, is you want to guide people to whatever this vision is. But I think there's also a bravery in, I'm still going to do this, and I want you to make a decision that is best for you and how you want to move forward. I know this other thing is important to you, and I'm not going to pretend like my thing is more important. So you make that choice. And I think ultimately when we give people that choice, it allows them to, they can mature. They are also more bought in. They're more committed to whatever it is, even if, like, regardless of the choice they make. So I think I thought that was something that was really important and really interesting about, again, Warren's leadership, where she's like, this is what this, this is how I'm being consistent. I don't know the answer. And so if you have a different one, I want you to follow that.
Well, I don't have a different answer. Yeah, that's. But yes, everything you said is valid, and I also think it's just Warren is following her vision. She's following her mission thing the same way she followed get Murphy to the CDC, to the lab before. Like, she's just staying very true and consistent. And, like we had talked about with that consistency with leaders and being consistent even in tough situations, like that's just, it goes to show the power that can have even in the most adverse situations is consistency. So that with
Because she
communication.
couldn't communicate here as well as she did with the Murphy to California thing, that's when she was like, let's not let this be an impasse.
Yep.
You decide. I'm still going to do this, but you decide. Yeah.
Yeah. No, huge.
Yeah.
So the next episode, if you're ready, are you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. The next episode piece, they're coping with loss again. That was the big thing that I took away from that, right? Because we talked about that Lucy had ultimately sort of sacrificed herself to save Murphy. And they're coping with that loss again. And they've done that with a lot of people, a lot of different times. But I think this is it's weird, in my opinion. It's different this time. I think it's always different, right? Not to get all, not to look at it from that perspective, but it's always, loss is always different every time for different people for different reasons. But they both know each other really well, but are also very new in the team dynamic that they have. So before, when they lost people, the team wasn't strong enough for that loss to have any effect outside of they lost somebody, right? And then they were also to a point where they've lost people when they were so well formed and the roles were so well defined that the loss of somebody affected how they functioned from a capabilities perspective. But they were also well formed enough to know exactly what that person brought to the team and what was lost by them, and then were able to divvy up, I guess you can call it, what those losses were. Right now, they haven't fully fleshed out what everyone's role is because they're slightly changing. They still know that Warren's the leader, but Murphy's kind of an advisor now. Other people have different strengths. Addie is that lieutenant. We haven't talked about her too terribly much, but that whole where she stands, we haven't fleshed that out again. It's I think that's interesting. I think that loss is a different type of loss, and it's starting to affect the team. I think of their decision making because they're starting to lose that motivation. They don't have a clear, concise description of the mission set from Warren. So there's like a lot of little things, and then they run into this surreal situation. With I forgot what are the people called that kidnap them. Doesn't matter. Anyway, am I in the wrong episode? Am I on the wrong level?
You're good. Keep going.
Yeah, I think that's like really interesting because they've started to separate within their group, right? They're fracturing. So.
Yeah. So yes, I think that as the team kind of copes with that loss and as they're kind of moving forward and they meet this new group of people who essentially kidnap them, and there's some obviously nefarious things going on. It was interesting though to also see Warren again meet that moment like a leader, try to get her team out of there. Yeah, there's a lot of just interesting things where now as they're coming together as a team, previously it felt so linear and it was like it makes sense, right? We're forming, storming, right? And now it's like we're unsure of where we are, like where the team is as far as where are we in kind of coming together. We know we're a team, but I think also sometimes we see that in teams that have been together for a long time where they're like, we're just together. That's just what we're doing. We're just on the same team. We're at the same company. That's just what we're doing. And again, especially because they don't have a defined mission. It's like, we know how to be together. That's what we know. And that's what we'll do for now.
Yeah, no, exactly. I also think it's Warren, in my opinion, towards the end of this episode, starts to like snap out of it a little bit. Like I think she started to realize the potential danger that everyone's in, and has that moment of, whoop, wait, my job is to stop the danger, right? Like that's what I do as the leader. I need to remove this. And she sort of has that snafu point and starts to act a little bit more like herself. And I also think that that's because Murphy in this situation realizes that she's not working effectively, and he tries to step in, not in like a take over the power thing, but he's buying into the group this time around. You know what I mean? Like we talked about, he's killing or mercying zombies. He's um uh he's lost Lucy now. The team's lost Lucy. He's a little bit raw emotionally over that situation, and I think he's trying to fall back. The only thing that he has is the team. So Warren, who's normally needs a break, and he's going to step in and try to do that, and he does it the best that he can. It's not effective, not just wasn't, but I thought that was like really cool because he's now become part of the team, and I think that everyone in this episode is starting to acknowledge that a little bit more, and they're somewhat more sympathetic to him because that loss affected all of them, not equally, but it affected all of them. And yeah, I think it's really cool. Like I said, all those little things, and then Warren snaps out of it, and all of a sudden they start working a little bit more effectively now.
And there's a point, and I think this is actually closer to the beginning of this specific episode, where there's a zombie coming their way, and Murphy just grabs something. He's going to go over. He's going to mercy that zombie. And the other people in the group are like, should we help? Should we go? And Warren, classic Warren, she's like, he's going through something. Give him his space. Right. So even in this thing where she's having these visions, she's trying to lead this team, unclear as to where and how and what that end result is going to be. It meeting the moment, caring about this person and seeing what they're going through and giving them the space to work through that. I think that it just goes to show her consistency. And again, at the end of the day, she cares about people, and the mission is the thing that comes next. And she was like that before. I care about these people. I want us to all move forward together. We want to get Murphy to California. And now, even though she's unclear, she still has that Warren cycle of, I care about you, even though I'm unclear and I'm going through some stuff.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how we hire Elizabeth Warren. I don't know if she's on LinkedIn or not, but I think
Elizabeth Warren or Roberta Warren?
Roberta. Who did I say?
You said Elizabeth Warren.
I was on my own little.
I mean, I think Elizabeth Warren is a real person, very hireable. Roberta Warren, not completely fictional character.
Yeah, I want to hire the fictional character. But yeah, no, I think that even though like you said, she's going through stuff, she still is putting the needs of the like others in the group, that's still like forefront of her mind. And I think that that's, again, when we talk about those pillars of leadership, you know what I mean? And I think that because like one of my personal least favorite terms is servant leadership. Like I don't really care for that term. I think it's because I've heard it used a billion different ways, you know what I mean? But to me, part of what that servant leadership is in the background of your mind, right? Even when you're looking at other things, like the needs of those people is always at the forefront, right? Like that you understand that the human aspect of the team, and that the team needs certain things at certain times, and having the knowledge of to know when those times are, right? Like when it's worth taking that step back for someone. Yeah. So yeah, I think it amazes me.
Agreed. Yeah, we got some really interesting things going on in this season. So just, again, a different type of team dynamic, just a different type of leadership style, even though there is the consistency, but still undeclared and unclear vision, whereas before it was always so clear. So yeah, I'm excited to continue talking about it.